Good evening, everybody. Welcome to everybody here in Vernon. Thanks to Vernon for hosting us at the historic Governor Hunt House, which has been beautifully restored. My name is Chris Campany. I'm Executive Director of the Windham Regional Commission. This is the 10th anniversary NDCAP meeting. So this is my 10th anniversary too, and a few others of us. Before I start the roll call, are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none. And Tony, is the agenda available? Can that be put in chat or anything? Or
I can put it up on the screen, but if you want me to move it into chat.
I was just thinking put it in chat if people want to access it.
Certainly.
All right. So I'm going to call the roll just to avoid confusion. I know that Todd Amato and Tricia Coppolino have said they're not going to be here. So we'll go with Madeline Arms. Present. Me. Corey Daniels.
Present.
David Eastman.
Yes.
Bill Irwin. I see him up there.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Bob Leach.
Here.
Brett Long.
Here.
Mark McDonald. Okay. David Pearson.
Here.
Saw him up there. Marvin Resnikoff. You see him up there. Laura Sibilia. June Tierney.
Here.
And Lissa Weinman. And we know that, I think Lissa said that she's under the weather. She hasn't joined us yet, has she? I don't think. I don't see her.
Not that I see
But
either.
it looks like we do have a quorum, it appears, Tony.
I'll do a quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, we have 9 exactly, which is what we need for quorum.
Okay. So now we'll move on to review and approval of the May 13th meeting minutes. What I'd like to do is get a motion to approve the minutes in a second, and then we'll open it up for discussion, and then we will act.
So moved.
Thank you, sir. Do I get a second? Thank you for the second.
Second.
Now we're ready for
Second.
discussion. Any discussion about the minutes? Any questions? Edits? Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor? Indicate. Tony, what happened to our screen?
I was trying to pull up the minutes, and I can't quite see the screen from here. My apologies.
It's quite all right. Once we get the screen back, we will have a vote. I guess I could go ahead and do the roll call.
No, it's, hold on.
Tony, I think the minutes are, the agenda's on the line, so if anybody's on Zoom, they can.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yep,
It can access them there just as easily.
right. We good? Okay.
Yeah.
So I lost track of exactly who I was here, but bear with me. So Madeline Arms,
Approve.
Corey? Corey?
Present.
We're having an echo here. Dave?
Yes?
Bill?
It is.
All right. Bill, did you vote in favor, or just nod your head, wave your hand?
I said yes.
Awesome, thank you. We were having excellent reverberations here, so we're good now.
Yes, it was very fascinating.
Okay. Bob Leach.
Approved.
Brett?
Approved.
Let's see, Senator McDonald's not here yet, I don't believe. David?
Approved.
I don't think Marvin's here, is he? No.
I don't see.
Laura's not here. June?
Approved.
Lissa? Not seeing her. Okay. All right, with that, and then I will vote in the affirmative as well. With that, I believe the minutes are approved by unanimous vote. Thank you very much. All right, next item on the agenda is a NorthStar update on VIII decommissioning activities. We'll turn it over to Corey.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just wait for Tony to put the presentation up.
All right.
Bear with me just a second here. I'm not sure why it's not coming up on the screen right now. Oh, come on. This was working before.
I assume folk on Zoom or whatever it is, are we using Zoom? Yeah. Can see that we're trying to find the presentation. So if you wonder why we're waiting, that's why we're waiting.
Yeah, and I had this working before the meeting. I'm not sure what's happening here right now.
And for the record, Lissa did approve the meetings in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let me try something different here.
She is here.
Come on. Yeah, that's already shared. There we go. Okay.
All right, can everybody on Zoom see that?
Not anymore.
Are you still there?
I can't
Not
see
yet.
it, Chris, but
Not
I
yet.
have, I can see the minutes by just going to the link, which is what I've done. And now it's the presentation piece.
Yep, that's where we're
So
at.
I can't see anything here.
Huh.
Okay, bear with us. We're seeing the presentation in the room, but not on Zoom, so bear with us.
Okay, folks, I'm sorry. I'm not sure why this is doing this.
In the old days of television, we'd have the technical difficulties sign up
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the screen.
See, what I don't understand is this is saying that it's sharing the screen, but it's not coming up.
Are one of you guys able to help Tony? Tony, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Click on that,
Yeah.
and then select this,
Yeah, which is what I did before.
share,
Okay.
and that should.
Yeah, here we go.
Can see it now.
Okay, thank you. There's an additional share button that I don't remember.
Want to have the little box there, full screen it? There you go.
All right. Can folk on Zoom see that? You should see the NorthStar Vermont VTI.
Sure can. Yes, I
Yep.
can.
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay. Corey.
All right, we're in business. So this is the NDCAP update for NorthStar decommissioning progress. Next slide, please, Tony. All right, as with every presentation we've done, we just remind folks that we maintain our pretty simple priorities. That starts with safety with everything we do. We still target 0 accidents, 0 radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear issues. And to date, we've had pretty good success with this strategy, so we're going to maintain it. The goal is to do it right and to do it safe. Next slide, please. Just to recap, this is the macro of our schedule, and it's been on every presentation as well, except for the one time I forgot to put it on, and then we resubmitted the presentation. It pretty much shows we're on track with all the large structure removal and demolition and the site restoration work, and that we'll continue the spent fuel management sometime well into the future until there's a place to take the fuel. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of work my way through the reactor building first. and then talk about the things that are happening outside, and then the other items of interest that I generally present. So this is on top of the reactor building. This is efforts to do a final and last cleaning of the spent fuel pool. There's some specific reasons for it. One of them being the way the stainless steel liner of the spent fuel pool was constructed into the building. Basically, the concrete was poured around it. It's not in a condition where we can just peel it off and crunch it up into a ball and put it in a rail car and send it away. We're going to have to actually deconstruct the portions of the building that surround it. So we cleaned it all the way so we can effectively free release the material, and ultimately it'll get destroyed when we do the open air demo on the reactor building. So we did a media blasting effort with it. We first tested a small section of it, and we proved that it worked to make it all the way clean. And then we continued to do that with the entire spent fuel pool. So next slide, please. And that's looking down into the spent fuel pool while it was being cleaned. You can see there's spots where we effectively polished the floor to get right down to clean stainless steel, and then the rest of it, after we cleaned it, we applied a fixative to it just to be certain that there's no loose surface contamination can come off of it. We effectively completely cleaned the spent fuel pool. And in that previous slide, what you saw was a tent over with a high efficiency particulate air filter, taking a suction on it to change air out while the folks were in there doing the work. So 40-foot deep spent fuel pool cleaned for the very last time, just so we can wreck it. Next slide, please. And so that's kind of what it looks like when it's finished. You can see the scaffold there on the left for access down to it. So quite a bit of work went into making that clean and happen. You get an idea for the scale. Then you look down there and see a skid steer, and it looks pretty tiny in the bottom, along with that scissor platform lift. Next slide, please. So since that was so much fun, we thought we'd do the exact same thing with the dryer separator pit, which is on the other side of the reactor cavity and even bigger than cement fuel pool. So this was the initial preparations for setting up the tenting for doing that same work on the dryer separator pit. Next slide, please. And then you can see a similar configuration with the tenting over it and the HEPA filters set up for the draw off of it. The exact same operation has occurred on that, and that's pretty much done too. Next slide, please. And while I'm showing you these photos, and again, we're working from the top of the reactor building down, a reminder that these are preparations that will put the reactor building in a condition that supports open air demolition. So we'll, tear the roof off, the metal off of the very top of the building, and then ultimately we'll run a large machine through the side of the building at about the spent fuel pool level, and we'll actually tear right into that location, and we'll use a large excavator to do the demolition. It happens inside of the reactor building. We'll work from the top down, and that's due to the unique robust construction of the way the reactor building is mostly supported by the containment structure in concrete. It's in the center of the building that doesn't lend it to regular demolition techniques. So this is looking down into the reactor vessel. And what I'd like to point out here is there's a pretty wide gap between that very smallest center ring where the reactor vessel itself sat inside, and then the containment exterior. And what was in there was a large bellows. Think of it as like a corrugated metal gasket that went all the way around it and sealed it across there. And that was a bit of a bear to remove, as we knew the way this thing was built, and it always would be. But that's all removed in that photo. So it shows that gap all clean and open. Next slide, please. So that's just a little closer looking down, and you can see a couple of people down in the bottom of that area of the containment, which we call the dry well. And they're down there finishing cleaning that all up. But it just gives you a perspective on how big it is and how far down it is from that upper flange. Next slide, please. Thanks, Tony. So as I mentioned, that reactor vessel to containment bellows, it's a big circumferential ring. So what we had to do was chop that up into pieces so we could then package it and send it to Texas with the rest of the contaminated steel waste. Not highly contaminated, but high enough that it required some special handling and packaging. So you get to see it on the refuel floor in its entirety in that photo. You can kind of, if you look in the back behind that yellow hose and that HEPA filter that kind of is draped down, you can see the back side of it as well. So next slide. So this gives you an idea with all those different segments of the bellows and how we package it into these containers that we then grouted into place and shipped to Texas. So a lot of work went into this. I'm just kind of showing you all the different components and get an idea for the scale of the materials that are coming out and the work that goes into it. Next slide. So while all that was happening kind of up on the reefer floor in the top of the building, this is at about the ground level, the 252-foot level, which is the main first or bottom floor of the reactor building. And if you notice, I'm kind of looking through a big circular opening. This is the equipment hatch by which we would bring in major components that were replaced or serviced throughout the life of the power plant. And this is where all the piping and components that used to fill this whole space up are now all gone. And you can see it, while it still looks kind of cluttered in there, it's nowhere near as busy as it used to be with all the pipes and components. Next slide. So one such of those components, this is actually one of the reactor coolant pumps. So we call them research pumps in a boiling water reactor. But that doesn't have the motor bolted to the top of it, but that's the pump itself. So that's a pretty big piece of equipment there. I think they're about, if I remember right, they're about 18 tons or so. Next slide. So that is, again, part of the reactor recirc piping, all cut up and segmented. And then on the right side, you can see where we grouted them into place to stabilize that geometry, provide a small amount of shielding, and allow them to be shipped off for disposal as well. Next slide. So all that equipment was coming out of the containment, and that other activity and work was being done up on the refuel floor. Additionally, we've been decontaminating the torus area. For those of you who have been coming to the meetings or remember the previous slideshows, we used to have about a 1.2 million gallon donut shaped tank called the torus. And basically that's what we used to call the wet well. The dry well was the airspace and the area directly around the reactor that contained it. And the wet well was half filled with water and it had pipes that went down into that water called downcomers. And if the reactor ever needed to relieve all of the steam pressure that was in it, we could actually release that energy down into that water when the plant was running. But this area down in the torus basement or the bottom of the reactor building is pretty huge. And you get an idea for the scale. Look at these photos. Seeing a 16-foot ladder leaned up against the wall on that one on the right-hand side. But that's all been cleaned. And again, all these efforts are to prepare the reactor building so it can be demoed. Next slide. So going up one level from the ground floor, you can see this is the 280-foot level. This is where the recirc motors and a lot of ventilation equipment and a whole bunch of other reactor protective systems lived. And those are all removed. And all you can see now is some pedestals and some frames where equipment used to rest. But this is pretty much all cleared out. Next slide. So that was what's happening in the reactor building. We're still on track to be able to take the roof and the metal off the top of it and start opening our demo around the first of the year, maybe just a little bit later, but the preps are being done and we'll be ready to do that shortly. So if you recall, what we called area of concern number 5, which was the area underneath of the what we called the new warehouse slab. where we had some fuel oil lines. And when I say fuel oil, I just mean diesel fuel that used to go between the fill connection, where we also kept fuel for the heating boilers that kept the buildings warm, and then the emergency equipment fuel oil storage tank. It was about a 80,000 gallon tank. They had a leak in them many years ago, and we abandoned those lines. We always knew when we had to pull everything apart, we'd have to clear that soil out and address those leaks that were all documented. So that's been done. It's been all dug up. All the sampling has been checked to make sure it doesn't have any further extended condition, and then it's all been backfilled. And now it just looks like it's brought to grade. Next slide, please. And then just adjacent to that, it's almost the exact same story. Another location where we had some diesel fuel oil in the ground, and we dug that all up and cleaned it up and then backfilled it as well. And you can see the little green rope with the sign in front of it. As we clean up each of these areas and we finish them, we then do what we call isolation controls to prevent any potential cross-contamination or entry into those areas once we've finished working on them. And then we manage those so we can conduct the final status surveys from a radiological point of view to satisfy the NRC, so we can terminate or do partial site release with the license later per 10 CFR 5082. So that you'll see those ropes and signs in a number of the photos outside. Next slide, please. So here's another pretty big excavation. You can see we're south of the reactor building and south of the large, what we call the big top 10, where the rail spur comes and we load materials and ship them out. This is really where the spray pond was, which is part of the cooling tower complex. It was just to the north of the cooling towers. We had some lines that were underground. We determined that they had asbestos containing material on them, so they had to be excavated and removed. And this just shows the scale of the excavation to dig those buried lines up. Next slide, please. And in these photos, you can see some of the workers packaging up and managing those ACM or asbestos containing material pipes, and those are packaged up and shipped off. Next slide. So again, similarly to the other areas of concern that I mentioned for 5 and 7 alpha, the spray pond was backfilled. So that excavation is all covered up. And while you can't see one of the signs, you can see one of the green ropes kind of in the forefront there going across the picture. And that's looking towards the river right over the top of the discharge structure, just to the left of that excavator in the background. Next slide. So additionally, the guys have been working through developing an access point to get down and around the front of the discharge structure. You can see a boom out there across the water. And then really what they're doing is they're making preparations to dig up a pipe that's out in front of the discharge structure underneath of the aerating concrete. We call them, they look like teeth that stick up a little bit where the water used to spill over and aerate, but there was a line underneath of there that needs to be pulled out. And why don't you go to the next slide, Tony? You can see it a little better. And you can see a copper dam being built in the far right side. Thanks, Tony. Those are the aerating structure right there. So we'll be digging that up to get to it. And obviously the rest of the effort is just to prevent any silt or impact to the river in accordance with the permitting that we have. It's quite a bit of work happening out there. And when that gets done, we'll be ready to do demolition on the discharge structure itself. Snip all the concrete off to 4 feet below grade, and then fill it all in and basically flush that bank off with the same grade and angle that it is to the north and south of where that location was, in accordance with the approved plan for doing that work. Next slide, please. So that's most of the work that's happening both in the reactor building and out in the spaces around the power block area. The IREAL site investigation completion criteria has been met. All the AOCs and the site investigation activities are done. We haven't seen any new areas of impact. We haven't identified anything with all the sampling and looking and digging that we've done around the site. Pretty good testament to the historical documentation of any issues that happened at the plant. But I would also just temper that with remembering that all the plant really did was make power. So besides bringing a truck here and there, having an underground tank with some lines in it, it's pretty unlikely that we would have had or buried or found unusual, materials or issues. But it's good. That means our investigation is working and we didn't get any unexpected surprises. Additional groundwater running wells installed. We've had A&R, monitoring our progress the whole time. And as they've requested, we ensure we get delineation for the edges of where some of these areas of concern existed. We've installed sampling as requested, and we are still developing the post-decommissioning monitoring program per the MOU with all A&R's input. And we meet with Graham Bradley and a number of the state agency representatives on a bi-weekly frequency or so, and talk through that and manage that to maintain our alignment with their expectations and the MOU and all the rules. So we're just business as usual with those folks and making good progress towards the finish line. Next slide, please. Just a few photos of the other activities that are not quite so exotic, taking samples, drilling wells like we talked about, and then grading and staging materials so we can do backfilling and monitoring all that and keeping in alignment with the MOU criteria that we agreed to for finishing the site with a final grade and making sure we meet all our commitments for the environmental monitoring and status. Next slide, please. Just another photo. I put this one in here just as a reminder to me to bring up what's kind of an important milestone is this reactor water cleanup heat exchanger was really the last, and the bellows that you saw chopped up and removed was really the last significant radiological components left in the entire plant. Besides a little bit of concrete in the very bottom of what we call the subpile room, which is the room beneath where the reactor sat and the control rod driving mechanisms lived, that we'll have to scabble up and then package and send off. But that's pretty inert and very easy to manage and not difficult or dangerous for our workers. There's nothing left of significance with the radiological signature. So it's really just making sure we get it absolutely clean enough. We have 100% confidence we can tear this building down with heavy machinery and clean it all up and ship it all to Texas and then grade everything out and finish the job. But that's an important milestone for us because it really makes overall the project feel like we're getting to the finish line from cleaning up the radiological components of it. Next slide, please. And again, some examples of shipping activities occasionally for like filters and things that we were accumulating radiological materials on. We have these casts that we ship by truck. And this was one of the last ones we'll probably ever ship out here. But that one left in, I want to say, June or July. Next slide, please. And then, as always, I throw in a few pictures of material leaving the site, waste being staged and loaded. And every time it's very easy because we move so many rail cars to get some fresh photos that have not been presented before. And these are all the such. So pretty straightforward what you're looking at there. Rail cars leaving, starting at the top left, what we call super sacks being loaded up and staged. One of the long standing protocols we've adopted and maintained was that we don't allow aggregated materials to stay on the site. Once we get them packaged up, we ship them out here. And that does a number of things. It improves housekeeping, it improves safety, it eliminates combustible material, and improves our controls. So the likelihood of a fire or problem is reduced. And it keeps the project on schedule. So it's all beneficial for us, and it's part of our target zero, do it right, do it safe mentality. And then on the right hand side, you can see a crane loading material into a rail car. And then the same thing on the bottom left corner. I think they would just put the lid on that rail car before it left. Next slide, please. So shipping and volumes, we're still sending 3 or 4 rail cars out a week. We're up to 920 shipments. Year to date, 151. And that was just as of last week. And you can see the volumes continue to tick up. 2 million cubic feet. I got an extra 1 in that total weight. I apologize for that. I think that should be 115 million pounds. I'll get that corrected and get that sent to Tony for a final product. But my apologies. I'm sure if you did the math on the tonnage there, that's 1 extra 1. And then the total activity is only ticking up a little bit. And that's not really going to change much from here on out because there's just nothing left from a radioactive signature. Next slide, please. So one more photo of the ramp as it's being built to come up to the south side of the reactor building. And a reminder that we're doing it right and doing it safe. And I'll pause there and let folks compose whatever questions or queries they have for me, and at the right time, I'll be glad to answer them.
Actually, what we usually do is the state agencies will go next, and then we'll do the panel Q&A for the state and NorthStar. So why don't we proceed with DEC?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name's Graham Bradley. I think most people have seen me before on these calls. I work with Department of Environmental Conservation, which is part of the Agency of Natural Resources. And this is just a summary I've shown before of our responsibilities at the site. So we're mainly dealing with non-radiological contamination. We facilitate ongoing communication and coordination within ANR. So there's either every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, depending on what's happening on site. We coordinate a meeting with NorthStar and their consultants and with the different state agencies. In terms of oversight of non-radiological contamination, that has begun with the site investigation, and where required, we oversee the corrective actions, the remediation. When there's buildings being demolished, Haley and Aldrich, on behalf of NorthStar, have been doing post-demolition surveys, and as Corey mentioned, we'll be moving forward into long-term monitoring. I also coordinate with my colleagues in the different permitting programs. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of what's taken place between within our remit since the last full panel NDCAP meeting from May to September. There's been some additional site investigation with regards to PFAS chemicals. We received a report in July, and there was some additional monitoring wells, which you've just seen the photographs of, which I think were completed last week. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There was 2 post-demolition surveys undertaken at the former warehouse and the compacting room in the which was part of the radioactive waste building. There's been 2 remediation efforts, corrective actions, which again, Corey referred to, and I will talk a little bit more about those. So this is work that we oversee, that Haley and Aldrich have been doing on behalf of NorthStar. It's what we're calling the Area of Concern 5 and 7A. And then there's 1 or 2 words at the end about the permitting program. Next slide, please. So we received the report whatever it was, June, July, of the PFAS investigation, and Haley and Aldrich had successfully delineated and defined the area where these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances occur in groundwater down gradient of the main leach field. This is to the north of the plant. This is a circumstance that we're seeing more and more at industrial sites where there's a leach field. These, you may have seen them in the press, known as forever chemicals sometimes, because they take so long to degrade. We find them in various cleaning, degreasing chemicals, and also associated with some electrical products. So these exist at relatively low levels in the leach field, but we are seeing some above the current groundwater standard. The current standard, 20 parts per trillion, and we're seeing sort of a double out, 30 to 50 parts per trillion in the groundwater there. So, and this is actually, now I look at it, within that sort of isolation zone from the leach field, where no drinking water wells are allowed anyway, because of the biological hazard down gradient of the leach field. But that has now been completely delineated in that area. Next slide, please. So this is now south of the plant, the so-called COB leach field. I forgot to mention, hopefully it's intuitive. The red dots mean there was water sampled from the ground above the standard, and the green dots mean it was below the standard. And in this area, we've got green dots towards the river, and we've got green dots uphill away from the river. But the reason for those two additional wells that have just been put in, the monitoring wells, is to sample to the north and south of those red dots. Hopefully they'll come back green. I haven't received that report yet. I'm not sure if the groundwater has actually been sampled yet, but those will go off to the lab. They'll be analyzed for PFAS and they'll be written up. And then we will get out those reports and make a determination if that has been delineated and if the site investigation is complete. Next slide, please. So I've got a couple of slides on the post-demolition surveys. These are actually not part of the contaminated sites regulation, the so-called I rule. This was, there isn't reason to suspect there was releases in these areas. We don't have evidence of releases of non-radiological contamination, but there was a floor slab here, concrete floor slab. As part of the due diligence, after that's taken up, there was additional observations made, and using a photoionization detector looking for volatile organic compounds, see if there's any evidence of contamination there, particularly around where there was hazardous waste stored in this area. And I think there was one sample taken that came back below the standards, but there was no visual or olfactory or PID evidence of contamination below that slab. Next slide, please. Similar idea. This is a so-called radiological waste building. There was a compactor room in there that compacting solid waste. So just because it was that was an area that dealt with solid waste, non-radiological solid waste. Due diligence, Haley and Aldrich on behalf of NorthStar looked at that area, see if there was any evidence of contamination, visual, olfactory, in other words, smell, and the PID. And there was no evidence in that area either. Next slide, please. So this is where it was identified that there was an underground storage tank in this area on the southwest side of the turbine building. And it was known that in the past there had been a leak here, but it weren't able to get to it at that time. If I remember correctly, it was actually removed in '94. So this happened in the '90s. And so we knew there was a corrective action, there was remediation to do here. So NorthStar managed this work, excavating that contaminated material, soils, initially looking for visual olfactory PID evidence to try, and it turned out that the area of contamination was bigger than was initially expected. That sort of slightly darker orange area was the initial investigation, which was already much bigger than was anticipated. The black diamonds there are where they actually took soil samples and sent them off to the lab. And when those results came back, it was identified they were still above the standards. So the slightly lighter orange is the additional investigation they did to get all of that contaminated material and take that back to clean boundaries. So it ended up being about 100 feet by 140 feet by 22 feet deep. It's quite a large remediation to get all of that contaminated material out, about 3,000 tons in total. And that was also sent to WCS in Texas, like the radiological waste. And it was backfilled with clean soil. Corey showed some images of that. So once the demolition is complete, there will be a new monitoring wells put in this area to confirm that there's no residual contamination in the groundwater, or if there are still remaining low levels, that will be monitored as it gradually reduces. Next slide, please. So here's some images of that. The image on the left there is that photograph is taken from the south side of the excavation, looking towards what were the, I guess, the foundation structures, below ground structures of the turbine building, showing how that was excavated. Top right there is that soil that was removed, that's stockpiled while the analyses are undertaken by the lab to determine what happens to that. And then that's one of the rail cars in the bottom right there that shipped the soil offsite, contaminated soil offsite. I believe that, they had to dig out some clean soil to get to some of the contaminated soil, and after confirmation, some of that was able to be reused on site. Next slide, please. Yeah, that was so that was the heating oil that we just looked at. Here, I noticed a mistake on this slide. There's a small 500-gallon, and that was actually the waste oil storage tank. That's that cluster of black diamonds on the left-hand side of the image there, in the green area. The orange area is actually where the 75,000-gallon fuel oil storage tank was. So there was a small waste oil tank. There was a large fuel oil storage tank, which was the main fuel oil storage tank for the site. Both were above ground tanks, not buried like the previous one. I understand there had been a leak detected previously. They hadn't been able to look under the vault tank, under the tank vault that was inaccessible at the time. So that was now the demolition is occurring. We're able to get into that and excavate out the contaminated soil in that area, about 60 feet by 80 feet by 23 feet deep. So that's actually going down a little bit further than the water table. So they go down just under the water table in that area to get that contaminated soil out. Again, confirmatory samples were taken by Haley and Aldrich. And we have a consultant on site that takes split samples and looks over Haley and Aldrich's shoulder just to make sure that everything's been identified and it's got clean boundaries. There's about 1,800 tons shipped by rail to WCS in Texas, and again backfilled with clean soil. And eventually there will be a monitoring well go in here to confirm and monitor the groundwater in this area. Next slide, please. There's just some photographs of that, showing that it goes down just a little bit further than the water table, because where it's risen up there, that's where the natural level of the water is in the ground. And you can see that that's a PID on the right that they're using to confirm that there's no more volatile organic compounds detectable in those samples. And samples are also shipped off to the lab to get a full lab analysis done. Next slide, please. And I don't have a lot to say about the permitting program. Things continued just according to the requirements of the permits. The public drinking water permit, there is still a public drinking water well on site. Discharge, although the discharge permit is currently not being used, it's still in place. The stormwater program, that's continuing, just making sure that the stormwater on site is being managed appropriately and so that so managing that, so contaminated, it isn't contaminated, and there's no erosion and sediment problems from stormwater on site. And you saw the work occurring around the discharge area and putting in the cofferdam and getting ready to remove the top 4 feet of concrete and reinstate that riverbank. And similar activities will occur around the intake structure. And there was a modification to the stream alteration permit for that, just altering the slope a little bit. And that was approved by our rivers program back in June. So that's the end of my presentation for this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next up is Public Service Department.
Hi, just making, oh, yep, my volume's on. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Daniels. I'm an attorney with the Public Advocacy Division of the Department of Public Service, and I'll be taking over for Eric Guzman, who previously represented the department in this role. And Tony, if you're ready with the presentation, I'm ready to get started. Great, I see it on the screen. In this presentation, I'll be providing a brief overview of the department's role, as well as an update on the current funding to complete decommissioning and confirming the project's progress to up to this point. Also with us on the call are Nicholas Kapik and Mark Miar, who are two of the department's financial and technical consultants for the review of this decommissioning project. So starting with an overview, the department is charged with ongoing review of NorthStar's financial performance and technical progress throughout the decommissioning. Oh, sorry, I just heard a question.
We lost your presentation.
I love the presentation.
I couldn't quite hear that. Should I pause?
Yeah,
Yeah,
somebody's
just-
loading up the presentation.
Oh, great.
I'm not sure what's.
It's on Zoom.
Okay, it is on Zoom. We can't see it here in the room. I'm not quite sure why it went away here.
So Tony, maybe change the screen view to where we can see the presentation.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Is it behind it?
It is.
You can see it poking off the left.
No, that's just that's something else entirely. There we go. Still don't know why that went away.
Okay, we're good to go. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, just as an overview, the department has a responsibility to conduct an ongoing review of NorthStar's financial performance and technical progress throughout the decommissioning process under the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding that was approved by the Public Utilities Commission. So for the financial review, the department's consultants monitor the financial performance of the project, including cash flow, reviewing NorthStar's accounting to ensure that costs are properly recorded, as well as assessing the financial health of NorthStar and its corporate affiliates, and assessing the viability of its MOU financial assurances to fund the decommissioning site restoration work. And then on the technical review, the department's consultants confirm in part through regular site visits that the work NorthStar has performed is reasonable and is consistent with the withdrawals from the SRT and NDT trusts, and to evaluate the project for issues that could interfere with its successful completion. And I'm not sure if this was missed when the presentation wasn't loading, but also with us on the call are the two of the department's financial and technical consultants. Additionally, the department reviews monthly summaries of expenditures, the annual reporting from NorthStar, which includes decommissioning progress reports, updated progress schedules, pay item disbursements, earned value reporting, such as high level financial detail from NorthStar. The department also receives notice 30 days in advance of intended disbursements from the Site Restoration Trust for any work that's performed, and also monitors the monthly disbursements from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust. We also conduct monthly meetings with NorthStar to follow up on information requests stemming from those monthly and annual submissions, as well as monthly meetings with ANR to discuss and review the project progress. The department's consultants also conduct regular site visits every few months to verify the project's progress that NorthStar is describing in its status reports. And further, while a large segment of the monthly and annual reporting is designated as confidential, the department posts all information that can be made public, including the NDT and SRT balances, the high pay item disbursement summaries, and the annual public report are all published on the Vermont Yankee decommissioning page of the department's website. And Tony, if you go to the next slide.
I go with my computer as a response. I hope that's the next
Thank
slide.
you. This slide contains a list of disbursements from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and the Site Restoration Trust since NDCAP's last meeting in May. The disbursement requests are for work that has already been completed. Prior to withdrawing from the Site Restoration Trust, NorthStar provides the department with a 30-day notice of the disbursement and the department has the authority to object to any disbursement within that time frame if it does not align with the work that was performed. And the department also receives a copy of disbursements from the NDT on a monthly basis. So as of August 31st of this year, the NDT balance is approximately 76.3 million, and the SRT balance is approximately 46.3 million. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this slide contains the trust balances for the NDT and the SRT since May. And the balances shown in the table include both their present value and the projected value if the trust assets are held to maturity. The balances are reflective of current market conditions and are influenced by changing interest rates as the trusts are invested in U.S. Treasury securities. So the securities have laddered maturity dates, and NorthStar has stated its intent to hold on to them until the date of maturity. So the NDT and SRT balance statements in the first and third columns reflect the present trust value if the assets were liquidated prior to maturity, such that they would produce what would otherwise be an unrealized loss. And the balances in the second and the fourth columns reflect the value of the trusts when the assets are held until their maturity date. So to summarize the different activities for each type of work activity that's been going on, the license termination activities have total 536.2 million, including pre-closing costs. As of August 31st, 455.1 million has been earned, leaving 81.1 million remaining to complete the license termination work. The nuclear decommissioning trust assets total 77.1 million as of August 31st, and that value is the value at maturity. The spent fuel management costs total 290.9 million. NorthStar has earned 34 million as of August 31st, leaving 256.9 million required to manage the spent fuel until all fuel is removed from the site, with the date for completion estimated at 2052. NorthStar anticipates collecting an additional 276.5 million from the DOE for spent management costs. And then for site restoration, the costs total 25 million. As of August 31st, NorthStar has earned 21 million, leaving 4 million required to complete the site restoration work. The site restoration trust assets total 47.1 million as of August 31st. Next slide, please. All right. Our consultant from 4 Points Group recently conducted a site visit in July of 2024 and observed active worked areas within the reactor building and outside the turbine and reactor buildings, including areas of concern 7A and 5, and the reactor building's ramp construction. No conditions observed during the visit were inconsistent with the project progress as reported by NorthStar in their most recent status reports. As a note on the discrepancy between the NDT balance and the remaining license termination activities, the NDT balance is reflective of the current market conditions and does not account for the continuing quarterly interest payments on the Treasury securities. So the value of the NDT without the unrealized loss is, so the value at maturity is 77.1 million without the unrealized loss. The NorthStar expects to continue receiving interest, also expects to continue receiving interest earnings on the NDT, which are not reflected in the reported NDT values. So with those factored in, we anticipate it meeting the remaining value for the license termination work. Additionally, if there's ever any need for more funding beyond the NDT for the license termination work, the 2018 MOU has certain financial assurances, including, and I think primarily the 140 million support agreement, as well as the additional financial assurance of 55 million in the escrow agreement. Based on the last approved schedule provided by NorthStar and the annual financial reporting, the department's consultants find the estimated work completed to be reasonable, and NorthStar appears to be on course to complete the project with available funding. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And do we have any other reports from any other state agencies, Bill or anybody else? I can't see.
No, the health department does not have any tonight. Thank you.
Okay. So I believe, Tony, if you want to clear the screen there, we'll get back to the panelists. Thank you very much. So now we're going to begin the Q&A on NorthStar and state reports by the members of the panel, and we'll follow that with comments from the public. Any panelists have any questions for NorthStar or the state agencies?
Yeah, these are mostly for Graham, I think. I just, in looking over your report before the meeting, I'm curious of how you're breaking out PFASs and analyzing them, because as we know, they're a family of chemicals, not an individual chemicals, and that the this. So can you?
Yeah. No, in Vermont, there are 5 particular compounds.
Graham, can you speak up? Can you repeat that and speak up just a little bit?
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you.
Is that good? Yeah. No, in Vermont, the working with Department of Health, there were 5 specific compounds identified. The main ones being PFOA and PFOS, but I forget the others. But yeah, there's 3 more as well. And basically, the standard is any individual of those 5 regulated PFAS compounds or any combination together. The standard is currently 20 parts per trillion in groundwater.
Is the state looking at all to adopt the EPA standards for drinking water?
Well, for drinking water. So yeah, the EPA have adopted again 5 PFAS. Actually, 2 of them are different to the state, or at least one of them is different, and we've got one that they don't include. And those will be adopted as per EPA's requirements by the drinking water program. It's actually been rolled in over a few years. And we are currently looking to assess if they would be adopted as groundwater standards or not. And we're working, DEC's working with Department of Health, looking at those issues for adoption for groundwater standards.
So another question I have is, I mean, you're putting in additional wells to look at the PFAS, and you have standards that are, you have samples that are above the standard. How long and under what conditions will those continue to be monitored?
So the way the rule works, we first define the area that's contaminated. We'll need to make sure that it's pretty unlikely anyone's going to put a drinking water in those areas, but we'll need some kind of institutional control to make sure it's not. They are actually down gradient of the leach fields anyway, which is an isolation zone, because of the presence of the leach field where you're not allowed to put drinking water wells. As to how long, part of the so-called corrective actions for that will be to monitor those as well, and until they're below the standard. That's the way it works, and that may be many years. What we would need to look at is how that is evolving over time, and how often, and how many wells would need to be monitored. The usual practice is to begin monitoring relatively frequently, and then reduce once you've got a handle on what's happening. Reduce that over time. So it could, it might start quarterly and end up being every 2 years, but that is still to be decided.
And how do the projected timings line up with the decommissioning licenses and financials?
I wouldn't like to predict how long, because they're not that high above the standard at the moment. These are called forever chemicals. They do not degrade easily, and it's likely just going to be a question of dilution over time of the groundwater. But I wouldn't like to predict. It could be years, it could be decades, but there will be monitoring in place while that natural attenuation happens.
Any other questions from panelists?
Hey, Chris, Lisa put a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, let's do Lissa's, and then we'll do Bob Leach has a question.
Just out of curiosity, Corey, how hot was that fuel pool floor after you drained it? Not after cleaning.
So,
before you cleaned.
Bob, as you recall from previous NDCAP meetings, we've cleaned the spent fuel pool multiple times. So at this point in the decommissioning, it's really not bad. I mean, it was probably a couple thousand counts per 100 centimeters squared. And ultimately, it was just finishing the media blasting and then cleaning it all up. So it really wasn't that challenging. And that's actually, I'll say, mirrors one of Lissa's questions, which had to do with, and I'll read it out loud, on workers. Are workers specifically trained to be doing spent fuel? I'll insert the word pool media, and she said removal, but I think she's talking specifically to the spent fuel pool media blasting. How many workers on this part of the project in the spent fuel pool and dryer separator pit do we subcontract out from an outside company? And how are their exposures monitored and or recorded? So I'll answer that also, Bob, and hopefully that'll satisfy both of you. The workers are specially trained with respect to their an internal division of NorthStar, and this is one of their specialties, is doing media blasting. So they're good at it, and they know how it works and how to do it effectively, which helps limit their time and exposure. But overall, as I'm mentioning, the exposure is really not that high in the spent fuel pool. Certainly not like it was when we initially decontaminated it. So they are specially trained, mostly just to wear the PPE, they're in blast helmets and their air-fed respirators, special high efficiency or particulate, and they're fully suited up in gloves and boots. So they're very well protected. And then, like I mentioned, they're good at what they do, this media blasting. They're very effective at it, so that limits the time they're in there. So the team for that, I'm thinking it's about 5 people total. So they're not in a hurry to do this. It's not in the way of anything or critical path, but they are getting it done with a small crew to stay consistent. And we don't subcontract it from an outside organization. And their exposure is monitored the same way we would anybody else's, with thermoluminescent dosimetry, a legal dose recording device, and electronic dosimeters that they can monitor in real time to see the dose rate and the amount they're picking up. And then that goes into their exposure record like we do. And we have a special radiation protection work permit that's specific to that job and task, with set thresholds and limits for alarm set points if they were to exceed it, either in dose rate or in total dose. So it's pretty standard. And there's been many higher dose jobs on the decommissioning and removal of materials. And it's from a dose standpoint, this is a pretty benign activity. And Bob, does that answer your question?
Well, it's a lot more than I asked, but yeah, pretty much.
And Corey,
I was just curious about the dose rate when you drained it.
and Corey, I know Alyssa's got laryngitis. Can you read her second question for her? Do you mind?
I certainly will. She actually had a couple more. And I'm going to read one more thing because I thought it was nice for her to write that we put this summer to good use. What an incredible accomplishment. Kudos to all the workers who put themselves on the line to get the job done. And thank you, Alyssa. You know, obviously I'm telling this story. I had nothing to do with the incredible amount of work these guys put in, but they did do a really good job, and they did it safely, and they're staying on schedule, and it's impressive. So appreciate the compliment. Our next question was on indoor contamination that's picked up by air filters. Where does it go, and how is it disposed of or categorized? And ultimately, we have air sampling in real time going all the time on the exhaust ventilation, which goes through filtrations, big filters. And the way they're set up, they'll actually reach a differential pressure as they'll start to mechanically clog a little bit long before they become significantly contaminated. And we just change them out, and those get thrown away with the rest of the material that gets shipped offsite.
Any other questions in the chat that you can see, Corey or Tony? Anything that from panelists for the state or for NorthStar?
One more question from Lissa. She asked if I could explain what isolation controls are again and how they relate to partial site release from the NRC. And when do you think you will get that release? And then she asked the question, once you get the release, can you relax security and controls? So those isolation controls are just an internal process that we manage the different parcels or survey units of the site once they get cleaned up. So we don't accidentally bring machines or materials or cross-contaminate the site. And we can say with confidence that nothing's changed since we've taken our sample data in those spaces. So it's really just for us to maintain it in that condition until the NRC's contractor from Tennessee out of ORISE can come perform confirmatory samples and review all our data from the final status surveying, which is pretty extensive, and then come to the conclusion that that parcel or survey unit has been completed. And even then, we'll likely keep the isolation controls in place until everything's done. We do not anticipate doing individual or separate partial site releases for those. It's not really, we're a fairly small site and we don't see any real value in that. There might be some non-impacted areas way off in the corner of the site where we could do something like that. But those controls are a little different for those areas. It's a lot easier to manage those. So hopefully that answers Lissa's question.
Thank you. Any other questions
You're
from
welcome.
panelists? Okay, Tony, are you saying anything?
For whatever reason, chat is not showing up on my screen. So if someone else can report on the chat, I would appreciate it. I think this is an indication I need a new laptop, actually.
Corey, I hate to burden you, but or maybe I should burden somebody else from public service. Can anybody else? Are there any other questions from the panelists?
I'm watching it, Chris. The only other question in chat is from Skylar Gold, so that can wait till the public comment section.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and segue on to the public questions for NorthStar and State.
All right, so I'll go ahead and take that one because it is the only other question in the chat. Skylar Gold also said, pretty amazing, very impressive. Question to Corey, what exactly is grout? And can you talk a little about the grouting of shipments as well as the filling with grout of underground pipes that are being left in place? Great question, Skylar. I know I say grout. All it really is low density concrete that we add to certain components that are being shipped by rail in their little containers in these super sacks. It's really just to hold them still, because if their geometry shifts the radiation readings on the external of those packages could increase or move around. And we don't want that to be the case, because we take very detailed radiological survey information, and there are certain requirements for transportation rules in Part 49 that we have to meet certain limits. So it also provides a little bit of shielding, but that stabilization and shielding, but it's just regular concrete. It's just low density. We don't do much to it. It's really not for anything more than just holding it still and providing a little shielding. And then as far as grouting underground pipings, ultimately, you know, we did cost benefit on most of the lower diameter piping and the stuff that's not very, very deep. Basically, the things that could actually be a concern for stabilization with respect to the way the MOU describes it. And we've removed all those lines. I mean, the stuff that's 30 feet underground, it's been there for 50 years. We've driven rail over it in heavy trucks, and all these huge components and things have been delivered to the site for all these years. Those ones, we have the confidence that that's not going to be a cave-in or a problem issue. And even at sites where similar studies have been done, or it's really not going to cause much of a impact of the service. So there's some that we're leaving, but they probably will not need to be filled because they're not a stabilization risk. Thank you. Good questions. And that was the last one in the chat.
Okay, anybody else online from the public has a question? Ann?
Hi, I actually saw Lisa does have another question in the chat. I don't know if you want to take that first, or.
There's one, actually there's a couple for Bill Irwin. Why don't we do those first? And there's one for me or the DPS. Thanks, Ann, those just flew in too.
Yep.
So for Bill, I'm not sure, Bill, if you can read the chat. It says, can you report on your department's measures to ensure public safety from excavation and other activities? And what I'll tell you ahead of Bill's answer is, remember, Bill's responsibilities start really at the fence line out, not for the excavations and things that are happening inside the fence and at the site, and then monitoring the transportation of the material offsite. And then he asks, what and where do you measure airborne and other radiation and or radionuclides in soil outside the property line? And then the last part of that question is, can Bill Irwin comment on ambient outside fence line radiation control monitors? And I'll turn that over to Bill.
Great, thanks, Corey. Corey presented it accurately in that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has jurisdiction for the effluents and the doses that are created for workers, for the environment, and for the public inside its property boundary. We monitor some specific locations along the fence line of the property boundary, and we do so with thermoluminescent dosimeters, which are changed periodically, and those have been indicating, as they have since the shutdown of the facility from operating, that the doses accumulating over calendar quarters and calendar years are within the limits as expressed in our regulations. They other radiation or radioactive material assessments that are questioned in the chat relate to soil and air, in addition to collecting air samples around the site at, for example, the Vernon Elementary School, at numerous other locations in Windham County. We have collections of water from both the river, from individual public wells and individual residential wells, and we analyze those samples. We also collect a limited amount of soils periodically throughout the year as a part of our environmental surveillance around Vermont Yankee. We don't find radioactive material in excess of background levels in any of those samples, air water, soil, and the direct gamma radiation as measured by our thermoluminescent dosimeters around the site are less than our annual limits for the decommissioning of 15 millirem per year.
Thank you, Bill. Go back to
Welcome.
Ann's question.
And Chris, there's one last question from Lissa. It's for DPS or myself. I'll go ahead and take a shot at it, and I'll let the DPS follow up if they wish to finish it off. The question is for DPS or Corey. NorthStar anticipates collecting $250 million in judgments against the DOE up to 2052 for Springfield storage. I'm wondering if that includes recent judgment for $55 million and previous such payments. To my knowledge, I don't know what recent judgment for $55 million she's discussing. We have not yet filed a case as NorthStar, so we haven't received any judgment. But the $250 million against the DOE up to 2052. That is correct. We do anticipate collecting that. And for context, ultimately, just for storage of the fuel with the SFISI already established, it's pretty straightforward. The cost for managing the staff and the cost of the SFISI is fairly well understood by both the Department of Justice and the DOE and their lawyers, and it's fairly well, it's pretty common throughout the industry. I want to say there's 38 or 39 SFISIs at 20 some sites across the country, and it costs about what it costs at all of these. So that's a fairly baked component, and it's fairly easy to predict. So I'll leave it for the DPS to follow up if there's any additional comment on that.
Questions, follow up from DPS?
Unless 4 Points has more that they want to add, this is a question that I'm happy to follow up with after the meeting that I could look more into.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ann, I think we're to your question now.
Okay, great. Thanks. It isn't really a question. It's a comment. So I think I've mentioned in this group prior that Citizens Awareness Network is researching shipments of low-level waste. You know, how much is generated at nuclear power sites? Where does it go? How much activity is there? What is in it? And we ran into a gap in data for Vermont Yankee, and I reached out to Corey and Tony for some help. And I want to say thank you to Tony for giving us a way to find the data, and we have it now. So I just want to say thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ann. Any other questions from the public? Tony, do you want to go back to the grid, like Hollywood Squares? If anybody just wants to speak up. All right, not seeing any. We will now go to early general public. Actually, let me ask a question of Lissa real quick, just so we know what to expect. Lissa, I know that we're expecting from you a report on the 2024 Rad Waste Summit. Would you like to defer that until the next meeting, given your voice challenges? Is she saying yes? I see June nodding her head.
Chris, that makes a world of sense.
Because unless it's just critical, I don't want to stress you out. Is she responding in chat or anything? I can't see it.
Yes, she did respond, and she would like to defer it.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Early general public comments from the public. I know we have a couple of folk. I know you, why don't you stand up here at the podium? Thank you for BCTV for helping with our logistics, and introduce yourself and what you'd like to say.
Yes, well, thanks for having me. My name is Jasper Gilardi. I'm with Good Energy Collective. We're a nonprofit that works on nuclear energy policy and environmental justice issues. And just thank you to everybody showing up online as well. I just wanted to come to the meeting and well, first of all, meet all the folks on the committee, but Also to invite folks in the area to a series of workshops that we are doing as part of a 2-year project on consent-based siting with the Department of Energy. The Good Energy Collective is one of 12 awardees, 2 of which are actually represented tonight, that is working to develop a consent-based siting process for the Department of Energy to one day use to site one or more interim storage facilities for spent nuclear fuel. So what the Department of Energy is looking to do is at some point in the next couple decades, they're hoping by 2038 to site at least one, if not more, consolidated interim storage facilities in the U.S., and to do so using a consent-based siting process is yet to be defined. Now, Good Energy, what we're doing is we're going around the country working with small communities in various states to draw a diversity of perspectives into this process to really develop a clear roadmap for the Department of Energy on what this consent-based siting process should really look like. And we're really hoping to hear from a community that has really experienced what it is like to be a nuclear waste host community to begin with. So we are hosting a series of these conversations here in Vernon for the community's neighboring Vermont Yankee. And folks are more than welcome to attend. We're paying participants to attend, so hopefully this will not be a major burden to anybody that would like to be there and have their voice heard. We're hosting these workshops on October 20th, 21st, and 22nd, and we'll be coming back to work with the same group of folks who have attended those workshops in the months following. If anybody would like to attend, feel free to reach out to me. My email is Jasper, Jasper, @goodenergycollective.org. And just to reiterate, we're going to be hosting these on October 20th, 21st, and 22nd. There's really no need to have any experience on nuclear energy. If you are just curious and want to share your perspectives on these issues, you're more than welcome to attend. I suppose the camera's over here. Again, my email is Jasper, Jasper, @goodenergycollective.org. Anyway, hope to hear from people.
Thank you, Jasper. Any other public comment? We have another person. For those offline, don't know if you can see someone else coming up here. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Tom Webler with the Social and Environmental Research Institute down in Shelburne Falls, Mass. And I wanted to come because Jasper's here. And we have also a similar project to him. We're both funded. We're different projects. DOE funded 12 different consortia and told them to go out in the country and learn about how communities want them to do consent-based siting to find a consolidated interim storage facility or more than one. So when I heard Good Energy Collective was coming up here to do meetings, I was interested. I reached out to Jasper and we talked about it, found out what they want to do and what they'll be doing over the next few months. Our team, which is a totally different team, is also interested in finding out what communities want to see in a consent-based siting process. And like Jasper's group, we also agree that communities that are presently hosting consolidated interim or basically holding spent nuclear fuel on ISFICs have some knowledge and expertise about this. And so trying to get your knowledge and expertise into this process so that eventually the government can run a good process that gets communities that want to hold waste to volunteer. And why will they do that? Because of the economic development opportunities associated with that. And communities have different reasons for doing it. No one's going to force anything on anybody. It's all going to be voluntary. And consent-based means that you have to ask to be considered, and then you have to say yes, which probably means some sort of public referendum. That's not defined yet. But I just wanted to distinguish the work that my group's going to be doing. We're going to be talking with people at Connecticut Yankee, Yankee Row, and up here in Vernon. I've already met with some people here in Vernon. We'll probably wait till Good Energy Collective is finished so that there's less confusion as to who's doing what. So I just wanted to say that, and thanks for your time.
Great, thank you. Any other public comment? there's nobody else really in the room here, unless the folk from BCTV want to comment. Anybody else in the Hollywood Squares want to have a comment?
Can I just ask the name of the person who just spoke?
I'm letting him come up and tell you himself.
Tom Webler.
Oh, hi, Tom. Okay.
Just say, he's probably your neighbor.
Who was that?
That was Ann Darling, I think. I just recognized the voice. Okay.
Yeah, it was me.
So next up, we've got the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee update. Again, if to give Lissa a break, I don't know if she wants to do this, or maybe one of the other committee members, or Tony, or somebody else wants to do this. Or we could defer it to the next meeting.
I can just add that the committee did meet back in June, and we had a speaker from Department of Energy whose name escapes me at the moment, but we had a lively discussion here at the Hunt House regarding some long-term technologies for spent nuclear fuel storage. What this focused on was right now the casks are more or less licensed for 40 years. There are efforts underway within Department of Energy with Nuclear Regulatory Commission monitoring, to monitor the casks themselves and evaluate them, say, every 15, 20 years or so, to assure that they, that their integrity their cask integrity remains. So, this may turn into a program that, say, there's monitoring every 3 to 5 years. Now, granted, this is not realize that Vermont Yankee itself, the ISVC has its own monitoring that that NorthStar does. But this was more discussion of nationwide programs and what could potentially be required. So the video from this meeting is available online at the NDCAP website, at the Federal Nuclear Policy Committee webpage, and I want to say it was about 75 minutes long, and it was. I learned things there, even though with some of the work that I do interacting with Department of Energy, I get a lot of ins of what could be going on. But there was some stuff here that I had not heard of before.
Great.
So.
Well, thank you for that update. Liz, if you want to add anything in chat, if you like, feel free to, or anybody else who's on the committee. Are you seeing anything, Tony?
Once again, chat has disappeared on me.
If anybody, maybe June, if you're seeing.
There we go. Okay, I got it back.
And no pressure too, Lissa. If you're good, we'll just move on.
There's a note here. I'm not sure how old this is. Oh yeah, this is just from a few minutes ago. Lissa is noting DOE is committing $26 million to this effort. A repeat from previous. Oh, I think this is following up on Thomas's comments. And yes, she's noticing that she'll have a written report next time, and also noting that the committee will meet again on October 21st.
Great.
So we hope to get a speaker in for that, and we'll have more information on that as it becomes available.
Great. Well, thank you to the committee for its work and Lissa's leadership on that. Okay, the next item I have is advanced availability of NDCAP presentations. What this is about is how soon should we reasonably expect NorthStar and the agencies to be able to provide the materials for the meetings ahead of the meetings? And Tony, do you have a proposal that? Do you have something? Did you have a discussion with your colleagues about what we should maybe reasonably expect?
Well, first of all, this was discussed a little bit at last meeting, and we had targeted getting presentations 5 days in advance. About I don't know, 10 days or so before this meeting, I did send out a reminder to people to say, hey, look, we have this commitment for presentations available 5 days before the meeting. I know NorthStar Public Service Department was able to get everything in. DEC got things in very close to time. I know they had quite a bit to work on. So my question is to, I know Corey, you normally provide NorthStar's presentation, and now Caroline, you'll be providing Public Service Department's presentation, and Graham, you're providing DEC's presentation. Is 5 days reasonable? Do you need more time, or what?
Hey, Tony, I'll start off and then let others finish. I like the discussion we had. I think 5 days makes sense because we can give you very up-to-date, real-time information. It gives DPS a chance to get the most recent financial information and digest it and synthesize it for their report. And I can do it earlier than just ultimately the report will be a little bit more stale if we're turning it any earlier than that.
Well, I think, so what we're, and just to be clear, what we're talking about is 5 days to the general public, all the different reports.
Yes.
So it sounds like NorthStar is not an issue. Public Service Department, 5 days, will that work?
Yes, that works well for us too.
Graham, for DEC, does that work for you?
I don't know, did we lose Graham? I'm not seeing him on the screen
We're not
anymore.
seeing Graham. So let's do this. Let's call it 5 days ahead of time. It's just good professional practice, I think. I think it seems reasonable. That should get, if we, we meet on Mondays, that gives us a couple of days ahead of the weekend. So let's call it 5 days, and if for some reason that can't be met, let's at least get posted a good reason about why it can't be met. Does that sound reasonable to the panel? I don't know that we need to vote on this. Just a kind of a general okey-dokey. Does this make sense?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Anybody online any of the panels online, you all okay with this? I'm not seeing gnashing of teeth or rending of garments, so I think we're
I
good.
saw June's thumbs up.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, that nails it for me. Okay, general public comments to the panel. Any further comments? Okay, not seeing any. So next is meeting wrap up and adjourn. Tony, when is our next meeting?
I've blanked on the date. I know it's December. I want to say it's December 9th.
That sounds
That sounds right to me.
I'll
I
go
know
hunt through
we
my
kept
phone.
it, yeah.
So normally at that meeting, let's see, and then our next following meeting is it January, or is, I'm trying to remember what we do.
Right now, we're required to meet 3 times a year, and last year we decided that, to hold the first meeting of the year in May.
Got it, right, that's right, okay. So what I'm going to suggest is, Tony, not trying to put you on the spot, but what I would suggest is, of course, at the December meeting, we usually, I believe, approve the annual report that's due to the legislature.
Right, yes.
And so if you would, Tony, when you have a sense as to when you'll have a reasonable draft done for panelist comment, we can't, to remind folk, we can't have a comment by email, right? Or we can't,
That's correct.
we can't communicate with each other by email. But what you can do is send comments directly to
Yes.
Tony, and then he can incorporate your comments into the draft. And then when we meet in December, we have the discussion about, and we approve or send it back or whatever, the annual report. So Tony, when you get it, sometime before December,
Right.
Before the December meeting, if you could get a draft out to us and ideally like give us a heads up, like when you
Sure.
think we might be able to see it. You don't have to tell us unless you just want to tell
Yeah,
us. Right
well,
now,
I know last year I targeted having the report available by the end of the week before the week of Thanksgiving. So I think this year that's the week of November 18th.
it's late this year.
So, yeah, okay. So I'll check. I'll recheck calendars when I get a chance. But we can probably target like November 18, November 20
Okay.
again this year. and have the draft available. My only question would be, do we want to post it online right away, or do we want to circulate it to the panelists and say like one round of panel comments before we release it to the general public for comment?
Unless there's panelists disagree, I would suggest let's send the initial draft to the panelists, because that's also a
Certainly.
way just to catch an error.
Sure.
And I will speak for myself, sometimes there will be something plain as day right there, and I'll miss it, but somebody else will look at it and go, aha, you made a error there.
I've been in that vote
I can go back and look
plenty
at
of
my
times.
first thesis, and there's a typo right there in the first. Anyway, so is that okay with folk? Well, I think this is again just a kind of official okey dokey.
Yep.
That's the approach we'll take, and then Tony, it'll be great to put it out there for the general public to see, and that'll of course be we're probably talking more than 5 days before the meeting. And
I haven't heard it. Do we have a December date for the meeting yet?
the 9th.
The 9th,
Yeah,
okay.
the 9th.
Sorry, I missed.
So Tony, maybe after this meeting, if you can just send out a reminder, if you don't mind.
Sure.
About when the next meeting is. And my thinking is also next meeting be fully remote. With the open meeting law, though, what we could do is anybody who needs a physical location can get a request to us 48 hours in advance, and we can accommodate a place where you can participate in a remote meeting. But is anybody opposed to a fully remote meeting in December?
You want just a Zoom meeting on
Right.
in December? I'd prefer this kind of meeting, but if I'm the only
The
one.
challenge is, this is really expensive to do, to have a few of us sit in the room. We can do that if that's the will of the whole panel, but.
If I'm the only one, no. I hate Zooms all.
I'm with you. But, and also, we just avoid some of the challenges of a hybrid meeting, if it's all one or the other.
I think the hybrid's the most difficult. And I think with as few people and few as the panel that showed up, although I appreciate the 2 public members that showed up, I would go with a fully Zoom.
Yeah,
Okay.
preference?
I don't have a preference.
Okay.
I was hoping more people would show up to this one, but I like seeing people face to face at least occasionally.
And most of the folk online, are you okay with this proposal? Or I guess just say if you're not. Tony, somebody, just feel free to unmute yourself and scream if you're not on.
Fine with the hybrid proposal.
What's that?
I'm fine with either the hybrid proposal or the remote proposal.
I favor whatever technology and physical combination will best serve the most people. That sounds like a hybrid to me.
Oh, and Lissa is adding that she would prefer to have an in-person option. So
Okay,
that's
then-
2 panel members who are asking for in-person.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe we can get a small meeting space. I don't know, is maybe Wyndham Regional Commission offices, the conference room there, if it's available on the 9th, or?
Should be available on the 9th. We could,
Yeah.
if that's a pretty small room, but if we have this kind of crowd again.
Yeah, exactly,
should
that
be-
would keep
should
the
be
expense
more than
down.
sufficient. The other thing that I'll just remind folk, if we're doing this hybrid option, we're warning it as a hybrid meeting, right? So if we have inclement weather on the 9th and we have to cancel the in-person, we've got to cancel the whole shebang. That's not a
Okay.
threat. I'm just saying that's just the way the world
Okay,
works.
Okay,
So,
that's good to know.
so just a heads up that's one of the, and who knows, we haven't had much snow. Last year, of course, November was our coldest time. So who knows what'll happen. But so we'll plan for a hybrid meeting on December 9th. And I'll work with Tony on the logistics of using our conference room. Our conference room can hold about 10 or 12 comfortably, 15 in a pinch. We have a nice air filter in there. It's heated. So I think we'll be okay.
9 people.
Isn't this room free?
No, there's a rental fee for this.
Right.
We haven't received the rental
building for nothing.
bill yet, so But I want to say it's like $250, $300. And then there's additional fees for BCTV to provide additional logistics as well.
How much is the BCTV cost?
Oh, man. I want to say that the base webcast is $300. Don't quote me on that. But there's the additional PA system is another $100 right there. And there's one more item to it, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. But this is, I think right now we're talking about $600 for BCTV's efforts for this setup of a meeting. I can recheck those values. I'll check in the contract.
So that's
tomorrow.
That's the price of. I feel catered to, being one of four panelists sitting here in the room, that you guys are willing to spend that kind of money. But we can check on the cost. But unless there's a change of mind right now, it looks like we're moving forward with a hybrid meeting. I don't know. In our office, we're not going to need a PA system. I guess we'll need a camera in there to record.
Yeah.
It's a fairly small space, but yeah. And we'll do it for free. Hey,
Yeah.
so I'll save that.
Honestly, I have a webcam right here that I don't have turned on. But for some of the Nuclear Waste Policy Committee meetings, we've run everything from my laptop. That I have a little speaker that I can tie in, and it seems to work
we'll figure out the
well.
logistics.
Yeah.
It's just if it's a hybrid, if what we do with during a hybrid meeting is have BCTV there to cover it live, as opposed to just recording it and streaming it on Zoom. I guess we can figure that out. If you guys are okay leaving that up to me and Tony.
Ooh, one other suggestion. Corey, you still out there? Corey? You have
Still
a
here, Bob.
decent size meeting room at your building. Would it be possible to use that for a meeting?
They actually don't have room in the PSP to do a meeting like this.
Okay. Just a thought.
No, I appreciate it. I would gladly host if we could manage that, but we just don't have it right now. Everybody who's left is working out of that building.
Okay.
I'm going to double check that I'm actually available on tonight, so let's do that. It's looking good. All right. So next
Okay.
meeting, December 9th, 6 o'clock. Right now, we're saying we will. If something changes, we'll let you know. But right now, we're assuming Wyndham Regional Commission. It'll be a hybrid format. We've got our owl and big monitor. We'll figure out if we need BCTV there or not. And so that's the plan. And Tony will get us the draft annual report ahead of time. I'll be soliciting comments from panelists where you'll comment only to Tony to be in comportment with open meeting law and public records. And that's it. Any other questions, comments before we adjourn from the panelists? All right, everybody have a good night, and thank you very much. And we'll see you in December.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Don't shut this down yet. I want
Okay. You catch that, Brad?
Hey,
Don't have the meeting yet, Brad.
I'm not gonna close, I'm talking.
Okay.
I guess I need a motion to adjourn if it's not too late.
So moved.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, hopefully we had enough.